Welcome to the Making Sense of Martech podcast, where we interview leaders and put them in the hot seat. I'm Jacqueline Friedman, founder of Monarch and global head of advisory for the Martech Weekly. Let's dive in and meet David Joosten. A little bit about him first. David is the co-founder of GrowthLoop and co-author of the first party data activation book, coming out soon, if not recently, alongside two co-authors, Alina Magwova and Oscar Kennis, with a background that spans product marketing at Google and data science at Stanford. He has become a leading voice in helping brands harness their own customer data to drive growth. His work focuses on bridging the gap between marketing and technology, providing actionable strategies for organizations to activate that first party data effectively. To start us off, one, welcome. We're glad you're here.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here.
And so to begin, we'll start with a few questions, get going, kind of low lift, high insight, no consent banners required whatsoever with some rapid fire. All right, AI generated content and marketing, yay or nay?
Yay, inevitable. And so finding the right ways to do it responsibly, ethically is the name of the game.
And those are the key words, and I don't know if everyone is paying attention to that. What is a marketing buzzword you wish would disappear?
All right, this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I'm going to go with composable. And I know that is
Okay.
a strong one given obviously a lot of the category work that we've done in the past. If you think about what it's for, I've always believed that it's got to speak to value. And so while things like extensible and open have come to mind, I think best of breed. It allows someone to actually have the agility in their stack that they would want to do the best thing for each different component and capability.
Basically, you're saying composable is the given, the standard. We just shouldn't be labeling it separately.
We use it. I mean, now I would say that like we're trying to think bigger as to well, what's the reason why you would have all this first party data linked to your channels, bringing all the results back into center. The reason is that you want to be able to drive faster and faster experimentation and therefore compound growth. So the way that we've gone to market is that we've built a compound growth engine that's runs with the gasoline of first party data through all of the engine of all the channels that you have. And that's sort of the benefit and result if you're thinking about it as like a business leader.
That makes sense. So, speaking of data, once again, is there ever an instance when you do recommend third party data?
Yes, of course. There are instances where you're trying to do it for creditworthiness, or you're trying to establish identity. You're trying to use things for ethical reasons that still help you drive like specific marketing outcomes. So I don't think that it should be the backbone of most companies, marketing strategy. I think the days where you just like buy long lists of device IDs because that's for sale, or emails and then just like spam everyone, that's clearly long past. I mean, can spam was like almost 20 years ago now, believe it or not. And then obviously we've had GDPR, CCPA, and all manner of other regulations since then to try and prevent that behavior, even though we should have just not been doing it as an industry from the beginning.
I'm glad someone else agrees because the amount of times I've had to fight off paid lists, I'm like, it's
Yes.
worth it, right? No, it's never worth it.
No, I've even tried. There are associations that allow you to sort of put you on the do not mail or registries and things, and it's limited what it does. It's
It is
amazing how many in the industry do not respect those.
correct. Not to mention the little carve out for political affiliations, no matter what.
Hmm. Yep,
They've written
exactly.
themselves out of those.
That's right.
uh, so another quick question. What's the most underrated skill for marketers today?
I would have to go with change management. So if you think about just the nature of our work, trying to work with folks as advisors and in some cases assistants and helping them make the changes that they want to see, I feel like that's the most used skill across our team, and the one that when we find it in the people that we work with on the other side, the customer team, the customers we serve, is the greatest reason why a customer succeeds. So
Makes total
there's so
sense.
many technology changes. What's how to do things ethically adds another layer of complexity. How to bring people through old workflows into new workflows. I know you had your own experience in marketing operations. Workflows and changing workflows can be a huge lift when you have a large team that's gotten used to doing things a certain way.
Yes, it's very difficult. The change management is just as hard as the enablement of that.
Yeah, definitely. It's just hard because it's a softer skill, right? It's not like you can study analytics and data science. You can study, and those are kind of like harder skills. They're a little bit more clear in what you're going to do, use them for, and how to study them. change management is learned by experience. Like you kind of have to be doing it in order to, and be empathetic, be observant, see how things work with different organizations, understand the cultural context you're in. All of that plays a role in how you succeed in changing the way an organization operates.
For sure. And this is Juan's favorite question to ask anyone at a dinner party. I saw it firsthand. Who is someone you admire, whether it's professional or personal?
I would have to say Sridhar Ramaswamy, the current CEO of Snowflake. Previously, he had built a lot of the Google Ads infrastructure, became SVP there, and then had courage to actually build his own competing company, Neva, that was trying to find an alternative business model to search outside of ads. That is incredibly courageous to take on Google like that and find, what some people would consider, a better model from a business perspective that respects user privacy more. So while that business model didn't pan out, he's certainly made the most of that experience. He's now obviously risen to be recognized. And in this current role, I think he's done so much to actually imbue a new product and AI thinking into the entire organization of Snowflake. So I'm really sort of like proud of him, and I've gotten to know him personally. And there's just those people that even though they're very successful, they make time for other folks, especially those that are a little bit further behind in the journey. He is one of those people. So I would definitely put him at probably the top of my list.
That's amazing. It's always nice when both those who are successful and have maybe had failures along the way are willing to have those conversations and be
Yeah,
available and mentor. That's awesome.
definitely.
All right, let's dive in a little bit more. I want to talk about your book. So, in your book, you write that zero party data reflects what customers say they want. First party data reveals what they actually do. So, how should marketers reconcile the gap between aspiration and behavior when crafting personalization strategies?
That's a well proven social science research result that as human beings, what we say and what we do don't always align 100%. And it's really important as a marketer to actually think beyond what people say. I mean, Ford famously said if you ask people back in the day what they would want, they'd say faster horses. They wouldn't have said an internal combustion engine driven car. So if you think about it's really benefits led. And so the way that marketers can reconcile that is you can never say you know better than customers. So if they're saying something, you can never contradict that. However, if you keep sort of choice and empower customers with options they may not have considered, and you frame it in terms of thinking behind what they're saying to the ultimate benefits that they may be seeking, you might just be able to find something in the marketing space that breaks through in ways that other competing brands just can't find because they're not thinking that critically about it.
100%. It's really synthesizing what do they actually want with what their words are saying and what their actions are saying.
Yeah, and that's where you have to combine like the data science of it, which is figuring
Of
out
course.
what, some of the analytics tell you with your own like intuition, empathy, thinking, and like really putting yourself, knowing your customers, interviewing them, and asking the follow-up questions about, the five whys and those things that help you understand.
Totally. You mean I don't need to build a 5 page that is the reason why we should pursue something versus my
Right.
gut's telling me and the data kind of looks like it's leaning towards
That's right.
it?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where actually experimentation becomes so important because, in truth, like none of us really know
Right.
until like our customers act and tell us through their behaviors. And so we have to just try to do things that align with what we believe might be, but be agile and keep trying new things and experimenting. And that's how we get to truth.
It's true. Reminds me of like the Wayne Gretzky quote of like, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. It's in the same
Yeah, that's
capacity.
right.
Okay.
Awesome.
So now we talked a little bit about zero and first party and how that you really need to understand what the true meaning behind it. Where do you see first party data as a company's most valuable, and how do you see its role evolving, particularly the next 3 to 5 years, which who can really see into the crystal ball of the future as MarTech
Yeah.
platforms are shifting towards your favorite word, composability and AI
Yeah.
integrations and MCPs, I guess,
Um,
all of the above.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is the shift, and I'm not the first to obviously suggest this, is from a marketing stack that's driven by these databases behind different tools that help give an interface for a person that's non-technical to do work with data, to one in which actually those barriers or silos fall away because the data is seamlessly integrated. What that enables is actually AI-driven workflows. So instead of going and living in a world where the marketer has to think about everything in like a factory model process, which is we generate ideas, then we do this, we personalize the messaging, we deliver these channels, and it's all kind of like workflow driven from a human perspective. As we actually start to infuse our marketing technology stacks with AI agents to be able to take certain components of those workflows, they will eventually be able to go more holistic end to end and thread the entire workflow so that eventually they'll be able to pull what data is necessary at what points to be able to drive an individual action, not just aggregated segments, audiences, and so on. So I think as you think about the value of first party data, there's no doubt it increases in value. And the reason is that like the same thing happens if you think about using ChatGPT. When you just ask ChatGPT a question and it just uses whatever knowledge it has in its large language model, versus when it's suddenly empowered with the data available on the internet and it can look things up and build little research reports, like the specificity you get is just so much higher. And so the same thing holds true for how you talk to your customers. If you're talking about something where you don't have that good of an understanding with first party data of your customers, it's going to be generic. The result, it's going to be, might be still be good. Doesn't mean that it's not effective marketing, but it's not going to feel personalized. And it's very clear consumer preferences have shifted to like, show me you know me in a way that's useful to me and helpful to me without being creepy, and striking that
Yes,
balance.
it's a tricky balance for sure.
Yeah.
So speaking of that balance a bit, with third-party data, as it's continually becoming increasingly obsolete and second party
Mhm.
depends on trusted partnerships, what do you think the next evolution of ethical data collaboration is? And can clean rooms truly scale without compromising trust? Because this is such a tricky moment and thing to navigate as a
Yeah.
company where you want to have these partnerships or you want to leverage this outside data, both non creepily and also you want it to be
Yeah.
accurate. So, what do you recommend?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few things. I'll break it down in terms of like the two use cases that most come up with those. So there's obviously many. It's essentially like targeting and measurement are like the two sides. So up front, when you want to run campaigns, who you want to send it to and how you personalize to them is all kind of related to targeting. And so whether you're talking about partners sharing information, ultimately the person whose customers it is, I believe, should be the one that actually sends out communications. I think data clean rooms are, if done well, are the answer in order to be able to find customer overlaps to send, very personalized campaigns that say, if you're a customer of both of ours, you might benefit from this new feature we launched or whatever. On the other side, on the measurement, it has to be decoupled from the ad platforms and those that have a stake in the results. I think that most CMOs I've talked to don't believe the, representatives at, I'm not going to name any of the ad platforms, but their sales teams essentially that tell them how great the campaigns are performing, because they see everything as a siloed slice when a customer goes through an entire journey of maybe education and a few impressions across not just that ad platform, but all of them. And so in the future, what CMOs really want that I've heard from them is, can you give me a secure and privacy conscious way to see my impressions at the ID level across all these platforms so that I can truly build an attribution model and a media measurement model that's comprehensive and doesn't double count, basically. And so that's sort of like two sides. I do think data clean rooms could solve that. It requires a neutral third party to rise up and sort of become that, I think, for it to really take on the scale that it should. And for some of these capabilities, it kind of need to be just built in the background of platforms that marketing folks use every day. It's not really likely to be effective if marketers have to learn data clean room technologies from the ground up, et cetera, when they're trying to do things in a privacy conscious way. It has to be a media measurement platform that's done the work of signing partnership agreements, figuring out how to do data clean rooms with a number of the ad platforms and such. I think that's where this is headed in my optimistic point of view.
Yeah, sounds like someone needs to build that company pretty stat.
Yeah, definitely.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, shifting gears a little bit. GrowthLoop, what's your current Martech stack, and what is your team's favorite tool?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, we're a company, you can look us up. We have, a little over 100 employees. So I would be considered probably mid-market as a company. So we use HubSpot, we use Salesforce, we use, LinkedIn and a few other campaigns and such. The way that we orchestrate though is with GrowthLoop to be able to connect to like the same folks that we would engage with on HubSpot to be sort of ever present to build brand awareness. If you think about a smaller brand like ours, it takes a certain frequency and it takes a certain amount of awareness for people to build brand affinity. So I think that part of the stack, obviously I'm biased, is highly, highly effective for us. However, if you would ask the question kind of like, except for GrowthLoop, what would it be? I've been super impressed by the progress that both Chorus and Gong have made in being able to derive insights out of the entire sales process. Our team in a hackathon was able to take transcripts of the consented call recordings and then be able to basically build like very targeted like action plans of like what should we do next that's most helpful for this team or this prospect, instead of thinking about it linearly like you do in most sales processes, which is like their stage 3 and you want to move into stage 4. But a lot of decisions don't work that way in real life. Real life's messy. And so that nuance can actually be captured there. So I would just give a shout out to those teams. I think they're doing fantastic work.
That's awesome. Yeah, I definitely echo similar sentiments, and it's really helpful from a sales enablement, but also marketing enablement and strategy
Yeah.
approach too, to really understand meeting your customers where they're at and where their
How
sticking
often,
points.
totally agree. How often would marketing leaders be able to actually watch every sales call? Like it's impossible,
You're
any
lucky
sort of
if they even
significant.
consider it.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So the best way to feed marketing is like they already work with so much data, generally speaking, in order to do personalization. This is one more data source that happens to be one of the most valuable because it's closest to conversion if you're a B2B company like ours.
For sure. Yeah, the demand gen team should be demanding that type of
Yeah.
effort, work, and highlighting it in particular. Great call
Yeah,
out.
definitely.
So you describe future-ready Martech stacks as privacy-respecting, insight-rich, and highly agile. What
Mhm.
does that look like in practice?
Yeah, it's a great question. So privacy conscious means that it's sort of built in by design. The like average marketer running campaigns obviously needs to keep ethics in mind, but the tool set itself should already support privacy in the sense that suppressions for consent management by specific channels and things. They should not have to consciously call that to mind every time they want to run a campaign. That can be solved by technology. And so, like the technology stack itself needs to answer those questions. The second thing you said was insight rich. And so, if you think about a lot of the systems that were in place like 10 plus years ago, they're about just like sending campaigns out the door. Sometimes they would allow you to see just like, open rates or things that are kind of like aggregate statistics that are channel specific. Where we need to move to is customer centric understanding of what's happening. So specific customers respond to certain channels better than others. So if you're talking to someone in a channel that they just don't want to be spoken to, you're spamming them, even though that customer might want to engage with you in general. Email might be a stressful place for them because that's where their work stuff comes in, or like maybe for them, it's like social media is a time where they're open to thinking about retail purchases or some interesting CPG product. And so the actual marketing technology stack into the future needs to figure out how do you drive things like retention, lifetime value, the longer term, biggest stuff that a marketing team needs to solve for if it wishes to change the trajectory of growth for its business. And so you can do that now in the obviously composable model that brings together all that first party data because you're tying it all together. So the third thing you mentioned was highly agile. That means basically that the tool set you're going to use at any given endpoint is going to change all the time. Whether channel proliferation is the biggest example of this, where people used to only reach over, email and physical mail. Then mobile came up. Then obviously you have a lot more social media platforms today than we did 15 years ago. People start to use WhatsApp for marketing. There's just so many different ways to reach people. And as those things come online, you need a Martech stack that supports the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. One of the best approaches is if you own your data centrally, you can plug and play the pieces on the outside of the spokes to be able to actually choose the things you need and capability wise. You don't have to make compromises and say, well, like, because I need an all-in-one email plus mobile messaging platform, I'm just going to have to sign up for something that doesn't support all of the social media ad platforms that I need to reach. Like it supports the two biggest ones, but it doesn't support numbers, 3, 4, and 5. That's not a trade-off marketers need to make. So by agility, I mean you need to be able to make changes by owning the data and then allowing the rest to flow from your data strategy and AI strategy.
I love that. Yeah, that's how I think in terms of modularity. I want to be able to plug
Yeah.
and play when needed and where needed because contracts are different timelines.
Yes.
Features, your own personal company requirements, everything changes much more rapidly than we'd be anticipating.
Yeah, definitely. And I talk about in the book, like not every company should go composable necessarily. Like I know it's a little controversial for me to say,
I will
but
challenge you on that.
I think most should. The vast majority should.
That's fair.
But there are cases where you're a small enough company, or you only use a single channel, and your team is just not ready just to go multi-channel and things. And in some of those cases, I'd say, okay, like the trade-off of some of the complexity of managing your data, the juice may not be worth the squeeze for your specific company.
For sure.
However, for anyone that's an enterprise, all like the answer is very clear. You do need to own your data.
100%. And it needs to not be in silos, separated from
And
each
needs to
other in
not be in
teams.
silos. Exactly.
Brought to you by our sponsors. If there's one theme that's followed me at every stop in my Martech career, it's trying to get good data into the hands of marketers. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about our sponsor, HighTouch, the leading composable CDP and AI decisioning platform. Companies like Domino's, Chime, Aritzia, and PetSmart trust HighTouch to power their data. And here's the kicker. 90% of customers have a real use case live in production within their first week. That means you can implement a world-class CDP in months rather than the usual years-long headache. That's why top brands choose HighTouch to personalize every customer interaction at scale. See what HighTouch can do for you at hightouch.com/MSOM. And now back to the hot seat.
You highlight the promise of Gen AI and predictive modeling, but also caution against premature adoption, which I think is very wise. How can marketing leaders ensure their use of AI respects privacy while still driving innovation? And where should those ethical red lines actually be drawn? Because it's very murky. Even if you're in an EU country with GDPR, there are so many unknowns. Every day there's a new announcement of the world shifting in some capacity. And so it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, definitely. There's a few things you've raised there. When is the team ready? And then where should the red lines be? In terms of premature adoption, machine learning, AI are like highly capable tools. And so like any technology that we've developed as human beings, if they're pointed at the wrong goals or something, you could really hurt a lot of people. So we certainly don't want to do that. It ties back to the question about the second part, which is around the red lines. Ultimately, because policymakers generally are responding to what's happening in market, many of us will be faced with questions in our careers where we have to make ethical calls on our own without a regulatory framework to follow. The regulatory framework's really trying to basically put rules to that ethical reasoning up front. The golden rule applies, treat others how you'd want to be treated as a marketer. So that means that it's really about mapping expectations of customers and consumers to how you use the data that they provide or that you capture as part of their behavior and activity. So that's really the understanding is like, how will they feel if they knew exactly what you're doing with the data? Beyond that, though, in terms of other red lines, generally, there are uses of machine learning and AI that lead to well-documented biases that actually exacerbate inequalities. So areas in that where in certain industries, it's not regulated fully. In financial services in the United States, it happens to be pretty regulated with fair lending practices. So you have to be very mindful of what the AI models are trying to do. If you're telling them to, look for folks that are most likely to buy the, highest premium product, there's a chance that it's going to bias that way based on, historical trends and patterns. On the other side, the scope of data you use can be managed under a similar framework as your consent management. So you are going to have certain data that you can use to target and personalize with across your channels. That should be channel specific. We write about this in the book. Like, you opt into email marketing and you opt into mobile marketing. Like those are kind of separate things. The same thing will hold true for a lot of the AI training that happens. And I think there's like a whole lot of gray there in terms of the way that people are using data for training AI models. And it will definitely be like more evolution of people's thinking in that. But for now, I think that the easiest proxy is consumer expectations, and then the consent management being a driver of like, if the data is available for like direct personalization and targeting, then you should be okay to use it for AI within the ethical constraints of like biases and stuff.
I love that framework, both of ethical constraints and just the easy understanding of the golden rule should apply. I am a strong proponent of regulatory aspects because that's how
Yes.
you actually make sweeping change. I don't think anyone would have abided by anything the GDPR was doing if there weren't actual real revenue consequences. And so
Right.
I'm hopeful we will have those guardrails because with constraints becomes more creativity. And so I
Yeah.
actually think it's a net positive, and we shouldn't solely focus on the individual fallible human to make those decisions for the population
No.
at large.
Yeah,
Definitely
definitely.
needs to be
Because
a
otherwise,
collective.
like, I mean, think about what happens. You break consumer trust. Essentially, over time, obviously, that eats into brand equity for the brands involved, no doubt. But
Exactly.
then consumers start preferring technologies like an email provider that actually starts filtering out any communications that are not in line with the spam practices, if that's sort of like something that's generally accepted. And so over time, like the reputation management matters in even organic ways that like would hurt your business if you don't follow those. But I mean, that's probably the toughest question you've asked me. Like that's a very deep, that could be its own book.
It should be, honestly. We need someone with the framework so we have the proper regulations in place that it should honestly be a worldwide
Yeah.
kind of decision as opposed to up to certain countries. There just needs to be ethical codes that we're all following,
Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with individuals, health, safety, banking
Oh yeah,
information,
definitely.
all of the above. There's so many
I couldn't agree
regulations in and of
more.
itself.
I think there needs, it's almost like a minimum global standard and then some cultural specific stuff. Like different cultures do
Exactly.
have different ideas about some of like privacy and things. Like I remember learning in Germany, there were like very strong privacy values there that exceeded most Americans by some of the social studies they had done on like different populations. And that comes from like history in some cases where like, you know, there was Eastern, you know, the Democratic Republic of Germany that, you know, had the government monitored citizens in ways that like now citizens are very conscious of that or has not applied to the United States to this day.
Yep. I love when a history lesson comes back around because it always rhymes and makes sense for present day at all times. So
Yeah,
always love
exactly.
that. Okay, so kind of taking a step back to kind of the broader industry at large with the development, I would say, of the term AI decisioning in the general stack. Like, I'd love your perspective on how brands are adopting it and what GrowthLoop is building to solve for it.
Yeah, definitely. It's a good question. Some of the early research I've seen is that brands are slower to adopt it than I think many of us expected. Part of it has to do with is the first example where marketers are shifting in their role from like the creator to essentially an approver or even an advisor to AI driven systems. We haven't really built the frameworks in our marketing teams to work within that change. What I mean by that is if AI is starting to make decisions about when to deliver something or which channel to use as a marketer, that's sort of level one of a broader pattern. The broader pattern is the content will be personalized, the objective of the campaigns might start to be directed by AI. There's so many levels to what we do as marketers, could be sort of driven by AI. And we start to relinquish some control. So I think that a little bit of it is it's the first tip of the spear in a broader trend that requires change management. Back to the question earlier about skill building.
I wholeheartedly agree. There's so many companies that are like, "What's a CDP?" So
Yeah,
we're slowly entering into all of these different eras and phases with
yeah.
where we're at in the next evolutions of Martech, and not every company is on the same timeline for sure.
It's rarely that technology is the limiting factor in my experience.
Oh,
Most of
correct.
it's, or you know, again, organizational frictions or like structural things. Like people are channel specific in their marketing when we're shifting to customer centric and channel agnostic over time, as you have a composable CDP, let's say, or something that's more centrally managed for your audience targeting. Those things definitely play a role. The second part of your question on what GrowthLoop is building to in the AI decisioning part of the stack. GrowthLoop's actually trying to re-architect around this concept of AI agents that execute AI workflows. Now, that's sort of like figuring out not just how do we inform the current workflow process that marketers have of the linear process, but actually trying to think non-linearly about how do we actually have someone that thinks about identity resolution very deeply, someone that and can make really good judgment calls that respect privacy, but also work on the effectiveness of performance. Others that actually work through and think about the personalization from an emotional, standpoint that might connect with customers based on their entire purchase history and experience and reviews and some of their customer support tickets and so on. So if you're thinking about it holistically, we're kind of working at the platform level and saying AI decisioning that is specific to just delivery, the time and date, as well as the channel. You got to solve the broader class. That's what we're focused on. It's not like just narrowly focused on the timing. Let's try to figure out like how would AI help us as marketers shift from creator to approver to eventually advisor or strategic advisor, and then start to be more and more autonomous as we kind of build in the right guardrails.
Yeah, I love that framework and kind of evolution of what the marketer's roles are, because I'm sure you are all over LinkedIn where it's just like the marketer is dead, MQL is dead, all the different things are dead.
Oh yeah, of course.
It's so overrun.
It's so
Everything's
overplayed. Yeah.
evolving. Everything is evolving
Yeah,
into something
exactly.
new, just like it always has. It's just at a more rapid pace and a conceptual capacity slightly different than what we're used to
Yeah, and
previously.
you still see there are marketing teams where like direct mail, prior to the web era, in some ways is making a resurgence.
Oh yeah,
And
it
so
is.
because other channels became saturated, emails become saturated, frankly, my opinion on SDR and cold outreach and those things is that's become very saturated and it's not useful. And ultimately, I think where we're driving to as marketers is what's the most useful thing we can do to serve prospects or customers. If we can make that shift, everything else will follow. It kind of goes back to like the golden rule in a way.
Yep.
And then mapping back to channels and mapping back to content personalization and your goals and everything else.
Yep, I'm on the same page. I shout from the rooftops, old email is spam at all times, and
Yep.
unintentionally make some people mad because
Oh yeah.
that's their livelihood, and I feel for them in that capacity. But there are more consent-based ways to do the same thing. And
Yeah, definitely. And to the framework, that's in chapter 9, actually, where I go into how marketers' roles are changing and evolving. And I do think that a learner's mindset, being able to experiment not just with the campaigns, but actually experiment your own workflows and how you might do things actually can change a lot of the progress of the business. The way we do it is we have quarterly hackathons where the engineering team actually makes a big effort to think through things in a modular and extensible way so that even in a 1 week hackathon, product capabilities can actually, go into the development environment and be shown to the company. And a lot of our innovations come through that channel, but also even like the actual workflow and the way we do things. We actually challenge the team to think a little bit meta and think about, can you build ways over the course of a week that you would do your job differently? And just have mindset of like, before you just do the thing, think about how might you do the thing given today's capabilities that might be different than you did it yesterday.
yep, I feel like that's a takeaway every company should take on because I think it also puts everyone in a different state of mind of how they approach
Mhm.
any and everything they're one currently working on, but all future things too.
Yeah,
Because
couldn't
you
agree
got to
more.
challenge your own normal, challenge your own
Yeah.
thinking and thought
And,
process.
and honestly, it's up to this is where leading change management as a leader, you need to make it so you have an experimental culture.
Yes.
Obviously, like within the right constraints and guardrails and things, so that like you're not putting things in production that are meant. You have to divide the world a little bit there.
We still
But
need
with
QA and
Yeah,
staging.
exactly. But like let's in within the sandbox environments and things, like work is a lot more fun when we actually get to like play with capabilities, try things out, take a little bit of risk, obviously within those guardrailed environments. Like you can have synthesized data that's not actually anyone's real PII when you're running things experimentally. But like try those things because if you don't, at the end of the day, like other people that are trying those things will just adopt them naturally at a faster rate.
Yep. I co-sign everything you're saying. All right,
Cool.
we're wrapping up. I've got one really big question left and one small one for you. So the big
Nice.
one is, what advice would you give to CMOs looking to future-proof their data strategy in a landscape that's increasingly defined by interoperability, decentralization, and data collaboration, and getting thrown, we need AI without
Yeah.
anything else from that sentence?
Yeah, definitely. I have three things I'd say. Like first, I would say investing in a unified understanding of your customer is paramount to pretty much everything else you're going to do. I understand obviously not all CMOs are technical. Part of that does require to like partner with technology teams or data teams, depending on the company and how the tech side of the business is structured, so that you can break down the silos from the product data that your company generates, the transactional data, a lot of the marketing engagement data. Those are sort of like three key sources that we see people pull together most frequently so that you can really understand your customers analytically, for data science, for personalization and targeting, the gamut. The second thing I would say is to think in a customer centric way rather than a channel centric way. And there's a variety of ways that is practically applied. So I know people say that and it sounds like a big generalization. What I mean by it is when you're looking at the setting objectives and goals for your team, rather than thinking about it as like, well, I want to hit these campaign metrics for open rates or things that are channel specific, even the way the team is structured sometimes, like that there's like an email person and there's a paid media person, and they have like separate goals, is to think about it in terms of like customer segments and goals for those segments. So I've seen a few companies do this really well where they have like new customer onboarding. They might have like retention as a goal, and they're trying to think about structuring their teams and capabilities to respect that that's the goal of like this group, is to think critically about retention every day. And so they're thinking about, well, why did customer churn? It might not just be that like we haven't contacted them in a while. It might be that in certain cases that customer was sold something different than what they expected. And so actually they were misacquired or mistargeted in the first place. And so maybe marketing is not really going to help unless you have a product change that maps to what that customer needs. And so there's so much depth to unlock if you think about the world in that customer centric way. And then the last thing I would say is to just embrace constant experimentation. So we talked about this a little bit. I mean it at the campaign level of like, build it into the workflows. Like one of the things that we tried to bring very early on in our platform in 2019, 2020 was a automated experimentation engine, which said essentially for every audience that you're going to send across channels, let you build a longitudinal control group that allows you to calculate at the end of this, did it drive a statistically significant uplift in whatever metrics you want? And so by building it into the process, you can make it consistent in terms of the methodology you use, so you can compare apples to apples, and you make it so that it's consistently used by the team. So that it's not that some campaigns are tested and some are not. It's like every change should be tested so you can really determine truth. And then I also mean experimentation in terms of what we talked about. People should try new workflows, like experiment with new tools, like bring that to work if they've heard about it at a conference, and like come get the vendor to come in and like talk to them, because you might learn something about what you're doing, even with the tools that you have, that you could be doing differently based on that vendor's capabilities. So I just think that like those would be like the 1, 2, 3. Obviously, change management is like the umbrella for all of it.
For sure.
But those would probably be the top.
You mean that's all CMOs need to be in charge of?
It's a tough job, especially these days.
Oh
It's
yeah,
a very tough job.
it sure is. It sure is, especially if you don't know where your data is, where it sits, and how to even leverage it. So
Well, that's
it's
where some
tricky
of it's
beast.
like the trust building between departments. I had the misfortune of like meeting somewhere the acrimony between departments reached a point where they didn't want to talk to each other, and so the CMO was choosing a siloed CDP on purpose
Oh
because it
no.
meant that they could kind of go around the tech team
Yep.
entirely. And that's what, if that's your organization, I feel for you. There is a better way. Like you have to find a way to make that work.
Thank you so much for being on, David. Who else should come on a podcast?
I was going to recommend actually Tim Brunk, the co-founder of MetaRouter. If you are interested in seeing kind of like the linkage between the future of first-party data and some of the third-party platforms, that he has the most nuanced understanding out there of the solution space right now.
Amazing.
How do we actually build first-party cookies, but still actually get to take advantage of, leveraging those to find folks on other platforms and things. It took me a while to actually grok it myself.
All right. Well, I will take you up on that introduction.
Sounds
And
great.
where can folks find you, find your book?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest place. David Joosten, Joosten. I'm always around to be emailed, actually, david@growthloop.com, especially for folks that are interested in the book. The book's available at Manning, so you can just type in first party data activation and on the Manning websites all ready for sale. It will go on sale at Amazon on July 29th. So for folks that just prefer to buy it there, you be patient, wait, 6 weeks or wherever this is by the time you view this to be
We
able to
could
purchase.
time it to that week if we want to make it
Oh,
line
cool.
up.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Thank you for being here.